Throughout history, humans have been drawn to symbolic roles: the protector, the chosen one, the savior, the martyr, not just as observers, but as aspirants. They see the mantle, the symbolic role, the burden, and the responsibility, and they want to wear it. Not because they are delusional, but because something in the human psyche craves significance, and the mantle promises that your suffering, your sacrifice, and your choice matters. This is about why people will reach for the mask they know will hurt them, and why they call that reaching heroism. My name is Winston Eves, and from my library we are examining what I would call the mantle effect, a reoccurring psychological pattern where audiences are drawn to the symbolic roles embodied by heroes, and where individuals project themselves into those roles. The term is non-academic, it is descriptive, a useful label for something humans have been doing since they learned to tell stories. The mantle is the symbolic weight a hero carries, the responsibility, the identity, and the burden that distinguishes them from others.
Winston, man, you're talking about heroes. People have always loved heroes. That nothing new, yeah? Why it need a fancy name, though? You academics always gotta dress things up like it wearing a tuxedo.
Because people do not just love heroes, they want to be them, not in the abstract. Specifically, they imagine themselves wearing the mantle, taking the burden, and making the sacrifice. And that desire reveals something about what humans need to feel whole. The mantle appears across cultures and eras, mythology, religion, history, and modern media. Always the same structure. An individual accepts a role larger than themselves. They bear weight others cannot or will not carry. They sacrifice comfort, safety, and sometimes life itself. And audiences watch this and feel called, not called to admire, called to participate, to imagine. That could be me. That should be me. If circumstances required, I would wear that mantle. The appeal is not a power fantasy. It is meaning fantasy. The mantle transforms suffering into purpose. Your pain is not random. Your burden is not meaningless. You carry it because you are chosen, capable, and necessary.
So people want to suffer now? That sounds backwards to me, Winston. Nobody wake up in the morning stretching like, yes, today feel like a good day for emotional damage.
They want suffering that matters. There is a difference. Random suffering is unbearable. Purposeful suffering is heroic. The mantle provides the purpose. It transforms the bearer from victim into volunteer. And that transformation is intoxicating. Let us begin with mythology. The oldest mantles, the archetypes that establish the pattern. Prometheus, the Greek titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. His mantle, the gift giver, the one who sacrifices himself so others may advance. The punishment for this gift was eternal torment, chained to a rock, an eagle eating his liver daily, the liver regenerating, and the torture repeating forever. He knew this would happen, but he gave the fire anyways.
Winston, that brutal, eternal torture for helping people and knowing humans. Half of them probably complain the fire too hot. Why anybody want that kind of legacy?
Because the story frames the torture as proof of nobility. Prometheus suffers so humanity prospers. The magnitude of his suffering proves the significance of his gift. He becomes immortally heroic through immortal pain. And audiences across millennia have been drawn to this, the willing martyr, the one who sees a terrible price and pays it anyway because the alternative, letting others suffer instead, is unacceptable. This is the first psychological mechanism, nobility through sacrifice. The mantle grants moral elevation through voluntary suffering. You are not a victim, you are a hero. The pain is not inflicted, it is chosen, and choice transforms everything. Psychologically, the distinction matters more profoundly. Research on trauma and resilience consistently indicates that the perceived control over one's own circumstances affect psychological outcomes. Suffering you chose feels fundamentally different than suffering imposed upon you. The Prometheus mantle promises your suffering is chosen, therefore meaningful, therefore heroic. The eagle eats your liver, but you gave fire to humanity. The exchange has cosmic significance.
Yeah, story nice and all, but the liver still get eaten, man. Pain still pain, mythology or not.
The pain is still real, but the narrative transforms it from tragedy into purpose, and humans will endure extraordinary pain if they believe it serves a purpose. The mantle appears throughout history: leaders who bear national weight, soldiers who carry collective protection, revolutionaries who accept personal destruction from communal liberation. Consider Winston Churchill, 1940. Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. France has fallen. Invasion seems imminent. The burden of national survival rests on leadership that must project certainty while facing potential annihilation. Churchill accepted that mantle publicly. His speeches framed British suffering not as defeat, but as noble resistance. "We shall fight on the beaches, and we shall never surrender," he is quoted. The rhetoric transformed civilian endurance into heroic participation. Everyone could wear a smaller version of this mantle. Their suffering became meaningful contribution.
But that was real though, Winston. That not storybook suffering. People were dying for real. Cities burning. That not imagination. That's survival.
It was both. The threat was real, and the mantle was constructed. Churchill crafted a narrative where British suffering was not a victimhood but heroism, where every person's endurance contributed to eventual victory. The mantle distributed. Everyone could participate in the larger myth. And this reveals the second psychological mechanism: distributed heroism. The mantle need not be worn by one person alone. It can be shared. You carry your piece, others carry theirs. Together you form something larger than individual capability. The mechanism is particularly powerful. It transforms isolated suffering into communal purpose. You are not alone in your pain. You are part of a larger story, and your contribution matters even if it seems small. Social psychology research on collective identity demonstrates that shared symbolic roles increase resilience, cooperation, and willingness to endure hardship. When people believe they are part of something larger, they tolerate conditions they would otherwise find unbearable.
So the mantle just trip people into suffering more then? Dress it up nice so it go down easier?
The mantle allows people to choose suffering that serves meaning rather than randomness. Whether that is manipulation or motivation depends on whether the cause justifies the cost. Churchill's cause arguably did. Not all mantles serve purposes that noble, but the psychological mechanism functions identically regardless. Now we arrive at modern media, where the mantle is no longer mythological metaphor or historical necessity. It is entertainment and fantasy, and yet the psychological appeal remains identical. Consider Spider-Man. Peter Parker, bitten by a radioactive spider, gains powers, and his uncle dies because Peter chose not to act when he could have prevented it. The famous quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." The mantle Spider-Man wears is guilt transformed into purpose. He failed once, and someone died. Therefore, he must never fail again. He must save everyone, and the burden is self-imposed. The weight is voluntary, and audiences watch this and connect deeply.
So people love Spider-Man because they feel guilty too. That rough, Winston. That's a heavy emotional buy-in for a movie ticket.
Because people feel powerless, and guilt is one response to powerlessness. If I had acted differently, outcomes would have been different. Guilt implies agency. Agency implies power. The mantle transforms guilt, a negative emotion, into heroism, a positive identity. This is the third mechanism: redemptive responsibility. The mantle offers a path from failure to heroism. You did wrong, you can do right. Your burden proves your growth, and your sacrifice demonstrates your change. Consider Batman, Bruce Wayne, a child who witnesses his parents murdered. Trauma defined him, and he chooses to wear the mantle of fear, becoming what criminals fear, using his pain as a weapon. Batman's mantle is trauma weaponized. He cannot heal from his parents' death, so he transforms that wound into armor. The pain never leaves, but it serves as a purpose. He protects others from experiencing what he experienced. His suffering becomes preventative.
Winston, that man needs therapy. Not a cape, not a cave, therapy.
Correct. And millions of people find this compelling, not because they are unhealthy, but because they recognize the impulse. When you cannot heal from something, making it meaningful seems like the next best option. The fourth mechanism, trauma sublimation. The mantle transforms psychological wounds into functional identity. Your damage becomes your strength. Your pain becomes your purpose. It does not heal the wound, but it gives the wound utility. Psychologically, this is complex. Trauma specialists generally advocate processing and integration rather than sublimation. But for audiences watching, Batman represents the fantasy that your damage need not define you as broken. It can define you as strong. Or examine All Might from My Hero Academia, the anime. The symbol of peace. A hero so powerful that his mere existence reduces crime rates. But he is dying. His power is failing. And he must find a successor while maintaining the illusion of invincibility because society depends on that symbol. All Might's mantle is the burden of symbol maintenance. He must appear strong while weak, project confidence while terrified, sacrifice his health, his life, and his personal happiness because society needs the idea of him more than they need the reality.
That one hurt, Winston. Man killing himself slow just to keep everybody else calm. That heavy.
Because the alternative is societal collapse. His symbol prevents chaos, and without it, villains multiply. His sacrifice, his slow death maintaining an illusion, saves countless lives. The mantle requires he suffers, so others do not. And that brings us to the fifth mechanism, a symbolic burden. The mantle is not personal, it is positional. You carry weight not because of who you are, but because of what you represent. Your individual suffering maintains collective stability. This mechanism appears throughout leadership structures. Presidents who visibly age in office, religious figures who bear community spiritual weight, parents who sacrifice personal desires for children's well-being. The role demands more than the person can healthily give, and they give it anyways. And audiences watch these stories, mythological, historical, or fictional, and they resonate because humans understand sacrifice. They understand carrying weight. They understand suffering for others. The mantle gives structure to those experiences, transforms them from burden into identity. So we return to the central question, why? Why are humans drawn to the mantle? Why do they project themselves into these roles? Why does the idea of bearing symbolic weight appeal so profoundly? Because humans need meaning, and meaning requires your existence affects something beyond yourself. Modern existence often feels small. You work, consume, distract yourself, and repeat. The impact of your daily choices seem negligible. You are replaceable at work, forgettable in crowds, and your suffering affects no one. Your sacrifice serves nothing.
Winston, that bleak, man. You saying people just walking around empty inside like that?
I am saying people often feel their lives lack inherent meaning, which is different. Meaning is not objective, it is constructed, and the mantle provides construction materials. When you imagine wearing the mantle, becoming Spider-Man, becoming Batman, becoming the symbol of peace, you imagine your choices mattering, your suffering serving purpose, and your sacrifice saving others. You become necessary rather than replaceable, central rather than peripheral. Research on meaning making and psychological well-being consistently indicates that perceived significance, the feeling that one's life matters in a larger context, correlates with resilience, life satisfaction, and mental health. Humans are not designed to feel meaningless. It damages them. The mantle offers immediate, comprehensible meaning. Your burden is necessary. Your sacrifice is heroic. Your suffering transforms you from victim into volunteer.
But it's still fantasy though, Winston. People can't swing through cities or punch guards. How that help in real life?
They can carry smaller versions, and they do constantly. Parents who sacrifice sleep, health, personal ambitions for their children. They wear a mantle. Medical professionals who work exhausting hours serving patients. They wear a mantle. Teachers who invest emotionally in students despite inadequate compensation. Activists who risk safety advocating for justice. Soldiers who deploy, and first responders who run toward danger. These are the real mantles. Smaller than Prometheus, less fantastical than Batman, but structurally identical. A person who accepts a burden larger than themselves. They sacrifice comfort, safety, and sometimes life. They do this voluntarily, and they call it duty, service, love, and responsibility. They call it the mantle, even if they do not use that word.
So the fantasy help people understand the real thing then? Like the stories give the suffering a shape so it don't feel pointless?
The fictional mantle provides narrative structure for understanding real sacrifice. They dignify burden. They elevate suffering from meaningless to meaningful. They transform "I am exhausted and overwhelmed" into "I am carrying something important." And that transformation matters, not because it makes the burden lighter, but because it makes bearing it tolerable. The mantle effect is not a delusion. It is not a childish fantasy. It is not escapism from reality. It is humans recognizing that life will demand burdens from them, that suffering is inevitable, that loss is certain, that pain can be avoided, and choosing to believe that bearing those things voluntarily for others transforms random suffering into purposeful sacrifice. Audiences are drawn to heroes not because they want to escape their lives, but because they want the framework for understanding their lives. They see Spider-Man carry guilt transformed into responsibility, Batman carrying the trauma transformed into protection, and All Might carrying symbolic burden into transformed societal stability. And they recognize something true, that humans are capable of extraordinary endurance when they believe it matters, that sacrifice can be chosen rather than imposed, that suffering can serve rather than simply hurt.
So what you saying is, the mantle give people permission to be heroic, even when nobody watching, even in small ways.
I am saying the mantle gives people language for heroism they are already performing. Someone must carry weight, someone must sacrifice, and someone must bear what others cannot. And humans look at these symbols and do not see burdens they wish to avoid. They see burdens they recognize as necessary, as meaningful, as theirs to carry if circumstances demanded. So here's my question for the audience, not rhetorical, genuine. What mantles are you already wearing? What burden have you accepted that you did not have to accept? What sacrifice are you making that transforms your suffering from meaningless into purposeful? Because you are wearing one. Everyone is. A parent, a partner, a friend, professional, or a citizen. Some role where you carry the weight for others, where your suffering serves rather than simply hurts, where your sacrifice means something. The question is whether you recognize it as a mantle, whether you understand that what you are doing, the exhaustion, the stress, the burden, is not random suffering, but chosen heroism. Small scale perhaps, certainly unglamorous, but structurally identical to Prometheus stealing fire, and Churchill bearing national weight, and Spider-Man protecting the city. You are already the hero. The mantle is already on your shoulders. The only question is whether you recognize it. The mantle does not promise that suffering ends. It promises that suffering matters, which for humans is often enough.